Hi there. We're so excited to have you back with us at Genealogy Publishing Coach. My name is Angela Breidenbach. Most people just call me Angie, and I am a published author and a professional genealogist with specialties in lecturing, methodology, and also in Scotland and English records. So I'm excited to share with you the fact that I strongly believe that the whole purpose of tracing your history and genealogy is not just to preserve it. That's important, but it's also in to discover the stories. And in those stories, you discover all the different elements of not only how you came to be who you are, but how to inspire and instill all the beauties and how to avoid some of the faults of your black sheep into your children, grandchildren, and on into the future. So for me, genealogy is a continuum of past to present to future. And it makes a big difference in your life when you use it in a way that helps to inspire you and inspire others. But I think that it's really important that if you want to publish your stories in any way you want, whether it's in a small article, whether it's just a little tiny bio that you put into your own genealogy to remember who that person is, or if you want to write the books, Genealogy Publishing Coach is here for you so that you can learn how to do that in a way that the public wants to read it. The biggest problem I've seen is that a lot of people don't know how to put that out into a consumer focused media and into the consumer's hands. So the reader's hands, if you will. We want to make our genealogy reading worthy. And that gives us the opportunity to share those amazing stories with other people. So today I have on Genealogy Publishing Coach my friend Liz Tolsma. I love her. I admire her work greatly. She is a phenomenal author of somewhere around 25 novels. And she is regularly traditionally published. And it is so much fun to talk to somebody who has that kind of skill and ability, who also loves discovering her own and her family's genealogy as an amateur genealogy sleuth. So she's come up with some discoveries that I wanted her to share with you today. And then she has some questions for me. And hopefully, between our conversation today, Liz Tolsma and I, and then on the Genealogy Publishing Coach, will be able to share with you some ideas or maybe just spark a flame of interest to get you telling your genealogy stories to your family and friends and getting them involved in helping you to preserve them. So, welcome today, Liz, for being on our show. And your latest book is what?
A Picture of Hope.
Oh, show us the cover, please.
There we go. That's the cover of it.
And
it released in October.
October. What's it about?
It is set in France in 1944. It's about an American journalist who has been spending the war. She's a photojournalist, so she's been spending the war in England photographing mothers standing in milk lines. She's bored. She craves adventure. And she actually sneaks on a hospital ship and sneaks into France right after D-Day. And that's based on a real true story of an American female journalist who did that.
Yay.
And so along the way, then she meets up with a French maquisard, which was a resistance fighter. And they also meet up with a young girl with Down syndrome. And then it becomes a race against time to get this child across the Swiss border before the Germans catch up to them.
Wow. So there's a ton of real history and real research in this book, isn't it?
There's all kinds of real stuff that I incorporate into the books. I love digging into the past and into history. They say history is stranger than, or truth is stranger than fiction sometimes. And that's true. I mean, sometimes you can't make up these true stories. In fact, I got dinged on a review because someone said that her sneaking aboard the hospital ship and getting to France that way, it just was too unbelievable and that nobody would have done that. And I laughed out loud because that is actually the most historically accurate part of the entire book. So
wow,
truth is stranger than fiction. And I love to tell these true stories.
I think that's the thing that gets me fascinated with all of these historical genealogy stories, because it's unbelievable some of the stories that you can discover. And then it starts to help you understand why people are the way they are, and why
Yeah.
you might even have, there's that old story of the woman who always cut off the ends of the ham, because that's what her mother did and her grandmother did. And it turned out it's because her grandma didn't have a big enough pan, you know. It's like, okay, I know that's a well-known story, but the reality is sometimes, why do we do the things we do?
Yeah.
And why does one person come out to be so courageous while another is not? And what was it that made that person have that sense of courage? And I think some of the questions I have for you today in your sleuthing out of genealogy has to do with a couple of people that were, in my mind, intensely heroic, because you have to ask yourself, would I be able to do that? And it's really scary when you are faced with the mirror and making a decision. Could you make that same decision? And you're looking at yourself in the mirror. Could you really? Do you really have enough passion or faith or whatever it was that these people did? So I would love it. You mentioned to me that one of your most fun stories that you researched had to do with your husband. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
That's right. I started researching my husband's father's side of the family, and I knew they were Irish. And I discovered that between the time they left Ireland during the potato famine and the time they came to the US, they spent a generation in Scotland. And one of his ancestors then married a young lady. And I started tracing her, sorry.
I got words today.
Sometimes the tongue gets stuck. Tracing her genealogy. And I started running into the last name of Stewart. And I mentioned it to my father, who also loves genealogy. And he's like, now, wouldn't that be funny if Doug was related to the Stewarts? They were the royalty in Scotland. And I said, oh, I'm sure there are plenty of Stewarts in Scotland who are not related to any royalty. Well, lo and behold, he is a direct descendant of King James II of Scotland, and also found out
wait,
that,
pause.
Okay.
Ooh. Okay, now you
Yes. That was really, really cool, but it got even better as I went actually a few generations after King James II. I found out that the family were Covenanters, which sort of was a very conservative Scottish Presbyterian movement especially in the 1600s in Scotland. And they were persecuted to a good degree. And I discovered that his 9 times great uncle, Archibald Stewart, and his 10 times great grandmother, Marion Stewart, were both martyred for the faith.
And that's where I look in the mirror and go, can I do that? Do I believe deeply enough in what I believe? And if you don't know, listeners out there, it'll come out eventually. I definitely am a believer in Jesus Christ. And so the question comes to anyone looking at the past, looking at these heroes of history: could you stand up for your faith enough to put your life on the line? And could you stand up for your faith enough to put your life on the line for another person, or for freedom, as many of these people did? And so I'm blown away by that. And the Covenanters is one of my favorite times in history to be researching in Scotland, because my family's also associated with that. You and I have talked about and lands and things like that. The Covenanters lost lands. It started off with, they would lose their animals, then they would lose their livelihood, and then they would be burned out of their homes, or they would then lose their land. And they could not stop these people who were believers in their faith and in their God and in the freedom to worship God and read the Bible individually. And that was such an intense issue between the two countries of England and Scotland, and the battle for the right to worship the way you wanted to worship. And so that has been this huge fascination for me. And then to find out that your family was also, and that you could track back to directly to these people who were martyrs, to me, it's like, if you believe in something deeply enough, yes, I think you can give up your life for it. But how many people do you really meet that do that, and have
Yeah.
done that? And what courage can we take from that? You have something else to show us, don't you?
Yes, in doing my research into that part of the family, what I discovered was this amazing letter that Archibald Stewart, which was my husband's 9 times great uncle, that he wrote shortly before his death. And I don't know how well you'll be able to see it on the screen, but for last Christmas, I um, took that and I put it on a canvas here for my husband. And it's really, I know it's really hard to see on the camera.
It's so
And
beautiful,
also
though.
because I graded out so the words would stand out. But there's a tower. This is a picture of a tower here, and that is where they were martyred. And there's some modern buildings behind, more modern buildings behind it. But this is the tower where they were martyred, where his uncle and 10 times great grandmother were martyred.
Can you
But
can you read that to us?
yes, I would love to, because you were talking about, could I be that courageous? Could I hold to my faith that strongly? And I've often asked myself, as I've come across some of my family stories, as I've come across some of these other historical stories, and you're right, it makes you look in the mirror and really examine yourself and say, could I stand up for something that I truly believed in, even to the point of death? And it really makes you stop and think. And so I'm going to read what he wrote shortly before he was martyred, and he knew he was going to die.
Mhm.
And keep in mind, as I'm reading this, that Archibald was 19 years old at the time.
Wow.
19 years old. These are the words of this young man. This is the sweetest and joyfulest day that ever I had in my life. I am more willing to die for my Lord Jesus Christ and his truth than ever I was to live. I bless the Lord who has called me, chosen me, and redeemed me through his blood, and for accepting my testimony. I am called to witness this day for him. If every drop of my blood and every hair of my head were a life, I would willingly lay them down for my lovely Lord Jesus Christ. Let none doubt this. These are the words of a dying martyr, and I seal them with my blood.
Wow. I mean, I literally have chills going down my arms. Now, okay, he says, I sealed them with my blood. Did he actually like put his thumbprint or something on it? Or did he mean that his blood was going to be spilled?
I'm not sure about that. I believe that he just meant his blood was going to be spilled. This is just something that I found online as I was doing the genealogy and tracing that other people who are related to the family have shared, and it's quite well known, actually.
I would like to give you a gift. And this gift is that I'm going to show you where you can find some proof of that. And if hopefully y'all can see my screen now, there's a lot of ways to track this kind of information because the Covenanters are reasonably well um, recorded. There's some that aren't, and there's some that maybe died out in the fields that somebody didn't find. I'm sure there's going to be situations like that. But for Liz Tolsma and her family, this is actually recorded with his name at this website. And this is the Scottish Covenanter Memorials Association. and it is an amazing website that shows the Glasgow martyrs. And Liz knew that he had been martyred in Glasgow, and she knew that that tower was there. And I was able to look up online and find the Glasgow martyrs. There is a plaque with Archibald Stewart's name on it. And it says, four Covenanters were executed at Glasgow Cross on 19 December 1666. And what most people maybe don't know is that that was called the killing times. And it was like the last period of the 1600s or the 17th century. And during about a 20 to 30 year period, really 1660 to 1680, it was called the killing times. And during that time, they literally were going out killing anybody who they found with a Bible, anybody that would not sign on to be a part of the Church of England versus the Church of Scotland, and that was in any way dissenting. So they were also called dissenters. So when you get into the U.S. History and U.S. genealogy, and you find comments like he was a dissenter was a covenanter, could have been from Scotland, Ireland, or England. And the Presbyterian Church was throughout that entire area. And even if they weren't a Presbyterian, they might have been called a dissenter because they didn't believe in forced signing on to a church that was run by the government. But this is the Scottish Covenanter Memorials. And this has listed right here Archibald Stewart, and it's at the Glasgow Cathedral Martyrs Monument. And I did get to go there a couple of years ago, and it was quite beautiful. So it's amazing to see some of these things. And then there are two monuments there that commemorate the 9 Glasgow martyrs at the cathedral. One of these is located on the wall outside of what's known as Martyr's Vault. The other is located inside the cathedral itself. And the inscription is as follows: Here lies the corpse of Robert Bunton, John Hart, Robert Scott, Matthew Patoon, John Richmond, James Johnston, Archibald Stewart, James Winning, and John Main. And it's interesting, none of the women were written there. So do you know whether or not your husband's 10 times great grandmother was where she was martyred?
I believe she was martyred in the same place, but I don't know why her name is not on there, whether it says here lies the corpse of those people. So perhaps she was able to be buried somewhere else, and that's why her name is not listed.
Yeah, very much like Vietnam, where if you didn't die in Vietnam on the land of Vietnam, and if you died on a boat, or if you died of your injuries later, you were not included in the Vietnam Wall Memorial. So there's a likelihood of that. So, we can check on that too. But this was amazing because it says, who suffered at the cross of Glasgow for their testimony to the covenant and work of reformation, because they durst not own the authority of then tyrants, destroying the same betwixt 1666 and 1688. So the killing times. And this is an amazing time frame that a lot of people, their land was stolen and all that. So they either died or moved off, or sometimes they were sent as prisoners to the America's colonies, over into the Caribbean or over into Australia as punishment for their crimes against the crown. So there was a lot of things like that. Sometimes they were starved to death. There was a lot of things like that that happened. So my gift to you is to give you this website. And I'm excited to be able to share that with everybody. And the website is covenanter.org.uk. And we are going to include that on the notes for this. So when you go to my website, angelabreidenbach.com, you'll be able to see the blog post that'll have that website on there. And do you mind, Liz, if you take a photo of your beautiful piece, your wall piece that you made,
Sure.
the canvas? Because
Sure.
I'm hoping to inspire other genealogists to do beautiful things like that and hang those things in your houses, on your walls, and inspire yourself and your children. I know there's certain things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that I walk past it, or I'll be cleaning in that area or something, and I'll just stop and read it and think and mull over those words again. And I'm hoping that someday one of my children will take this and hang it on their wall and pass it down so that they won't forget the words of their ancestors, for sure.
Wow. And so now, because your husband was a direct descendant, that means Archibald Stewart must have had a child.
No, he was not a direct descendant of Archibald Stewart.
Okay.
Archibald Stewart was his 9 times great uncle. My
Gotcha.
husband is descended from um,
James.
Archibald's youngest brother. So that's
Oh,
where my hand, yeah, and he was just a small child, I think 5 years old at the time that his brother was murdered. So
wow.
yes, yes.
Wow. And I think it's a fabulous opportunity though to discover that and go back and look at how did that affect his brother? How did it affect the people around them? What did they win or lose? And I don't mean whether it had to be financial or not, but did they win, some sort of independence like they did over in the US colonies? Did they win back their land? Did they lose everything, and were they willing to lose it all for that? Those are incredible stories to discover and to encourage us I mean, looking around at your home, right now,
Yeah.
and all of the beautiful things that we have here in America as the opportunity to have a warm and cozy home. Uh, would you be willing to give that up for freedom and for the freedom of religion? You know, and there's other countries in the world that I don't know that that would be an important element for them. And that's not judging. That's just, would it be? What would
Right.
what would
Yeah.
make anyone in any part of the world want to give up their life for something that they believed in so strongly? Wow.
Mhm.
Do you know any of the story of your husband's 10 times great grandmother at all yet?
Still doing some research on that. She is quite well known, and there is a good bit of information about her. Why they arrested her, I am not sure. I'm not 100% clear on that, but it's something that I need to take some more time and do a little bit more research into her and why they arrested and murdered her as well. I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that she didn't back down on her beliefs either. Her husband had died a natural death a few years before this, but he had also been investigated at the around that time, shortly before he died, which was just a year or two before this.
Wow.
So when she was murdered, then my husband's 9 times great grandfather was left an orphan, and he was raised by one of his older brothers. And they did not lose their land. In fact, my husband's 9 times great grandfather ended up inheriting that farm, that land. And just the other day, I was trying to look up where that farm was and where that land is. I'm not exactly sure if I found it or not. If what I came up with is the correct spot, there is nothing left there today except a really pretty river and some lovely fields and green fields and rolling hills. So I'm not sure if that's the spot though, but I'd really love to find out where that farm was.
What was the name of it? Do you know?
I knew you were going to ask me that. And I cannot think of it off the top of my head, unfortunately. I'm sorry, but
That's okay. If you do, shoot it over to me. I might have an
yeah.
idea or two. One of the things that really does help, and you've probably been there, is there's Scotland's Places, and that is a really great website for helping to kind of find some of these things. And another way to find some of the lands, and obviously we're not doing an in-depth class here, I would suggest the National Institute for Genealogical Studies for in-depth classes on that. But the beauty of the land records is that even if you were a very poor person, if you worked on the land, or if you even owned a piece of the land, if you were a crofter, any of those things, your name is listed in the land records. And so tracking back, because you have the names of these people, you might be able to stumble on it through tax records. You might be able to stumble on it through the name of the property. And that's very helpful. It sounds like, were they from Southern Scotland? Because that's where a lot of the Covenanters were from.
They were from the Glasgow area. That much I know.
Okay. So we might be able to dig into that in the future. That'd be really fun. And
That would be, yeah.
and I know going there made a big difference for me. Standing on the land that my family once owned was a huge emotional moment. I don't know. There is something about going home to your homeland. And it's interesting because when we're so mixed here in the US, like, because I think you also do, you have some Scandinavian, or you had Polish.
Yes, I have a little bit of everything. My parents are yeah, both of my parents are Dutch, but my dad is Frisian, which is the far northwest province of the Netherlands, and so we have a good bit of English as well as Swedish in us, because they
Nice.
came and they conquered that part of the world, and so there was a lot in it. And because the Frisians just married more Frisians, that is not very diluted at all. I was surprised at the large percentage of English and Swedish that I have in me. And then my mother's family is I found out because I had a very, very difficult time tracking them, finding anything out. I couldn't make the jump across the pond. My great grandparents came here in the 1890s. And beyond that, I couldn't find anything. I just kept running into brick wall after brick wall. And the Slovakian records, church records, the Polish church records are actually very, very good. And I couldn't understand why I couldn't find anything out. And then just by going on Ancestry, looking up some of my DNA matches and looking at their family trees, I was just scrolling through, and it's like a fourth cousin. So I had to do a lot of scrolling down to get to that place. And I found a name that sounded Eastern European. I'm like, oh, okay. I wonder if this is the missing link. And so that kind of got me to where my family had come from. And I discovered that my mom is part of an ethnic minority that lives in this area along what is today the Polish-Slovak border. And they were a very insular community. They had their own language. They had their own form of Orthodox Christianity. They had their own customs, their own ways of doing things. And they were called the Lemko, or sometimes they're just called Lemko. Sometimes they're called Lemko Rusins, or Little Russians. So it was very interesting to dive into that and to find out how they were persecuted. And this group was not persecuted necessarily because of their religious beliefs, but just because they were ethnic minorities. And so I've been able to find out a lot about the Lemkos, but I have not been able to trace my family. I still do not know who my great grandparents are, or anybody further back than that. So
that is so challenging, and especially if you don't speak the language or don't read the language. A couple of places that I found that have been really helpful with things like, I don't read German and I'm not a German expert, and I want to research for my husband's family. And I've learned that the Family History Library in Salt Lake does usually have experts on hand that will work with you for free, which is nice because they can maybe read the records or point you in the right direction. And I think that's really helpful. But in addition, like the National Institute of Genealogical Studies has graduates that graduate in like Eastern European or England or Dutch, or whatever, what their specialty is, because they have a similar family lineage. And so I found out that you can go to the National Institute for Genealogical Studies on their website, and you can look up the graduates and who has the certificates in that, and you can find a name of somebody that you can contact to help with reading those records. So I'll give you a link to that, and I'll put that also, folks, I'll put that into our notes for the show. But I thought that would be really helpful to you because you might be able to find somebody who actually reads or understands how to research in that particular arena. Some of the struggles you're going to run into, which you probably already know, being an expert in World War II, is that sadly a lot of these records continue to have been either destroyed through that war, or the people group was moved out, and so there's no connection to where those records might have been. And this is where you're hoping that you're going to find family Bibles. But another tip would be to, you can look at the paintings and you can look at those kinds of things. But if there was any jewelry that you saw in a painting or that you saw handed down through family, look for inscriptions, because a lot of those pieces were inscribed during that time. And that's tough to do because sometimes people had to sell their jewelry in order to get onto ships and get into places that were a little bit safer. But an unusual thing too would be to go looking into old World War II records for the Germany and the Nazis and things like that. A lot of those kept just scrupulous records, which I do not know why they did that. But they
Yeah,
did. They
they
did.
did. Yes.
Do you? I mean, you're the World War II expert. Why did they keep those records?
That's just from what I understand, the German way, that they are meticulous about those kinds of things and they keep records about everything. And the side of my husband that isn't Irish Scottish is German. And so if he's any indication, I can say, yes, that's the way that they are, because that's the way that he is. He keeps track of everything and keeps records of everything. So it makes sense that they did that. But you're exactly right that my family had left by World War II.
Mhm.
There were really two waves where the Lemkos were pushed out. One was during the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The Hungarians did not like the Lemkos at all and wanted their land and forced a lot of them out. And was in the 1890s, and that's when my great-grandparents came over. And then the second wave was at the end of World War II, when the Soviets came into that part of the world, and they desecrated the
Yeah.
gravestones of the church in the town Dubny, Poland, where my mother's side of the family, so the maternal side,
Mhm.
came from. And the one stone standing there still was a woman who died, I believe, in about 1914, and her last name is Dubnansky. And when I told my parents that, they're like, well, that's our family. We're
Wow.
Dubnanskys. So I know I have Dubnansky in there. I just can't make the connection. I have a feeling that I may have a great great grandmother who was of Dubnansky, but I can't prove it. So
And
it'd be
that's where
interesting to get into that.
your mtDNA might be able to come in handy,
Mhm.
because it could connect you. You've taken your DNA
Yes.
samples. What
Yes.
companies did you use?
I just used ancestry.com. So
Okay.
I used them. Mhm.
And you can upload that to other places. A lot of
Right.
them will allow you to do that, and that's really nice. My Heritage, you can upload to.
Right.
Family Tree DNA is probably the most robust in a lot of ways, and that one's nice because you can get the Y DNA for your husband. You could probably
Mhm.
connect him right back to King James. The beauty with the mtDNA then is you can find other female relatives, but easily with that, as long as they're living, obviously, can and have taken the DNA test. But it's very helpful because it does give you, it's not perfect. There's
Right.
not going to be anything perfect. And I think
Right.
one of the reasons that DNA gets misunderstood is that it is being compared to the pool of people, right? But if you can somehow connect to some third or fourth cousins, and on back, you may be able to help each other look for things like family religious records, family Bibles, family stories that might, even though it may not prove 100% true, it might give you a clue and go in the right direction. Um,
Mhm.
one of my family stories had to do with somebody that disappeared in 1902 and they couldn't find him. And I'm not at liberty to share that story quite yet, but that person, I found them because the date that person went missing, I was able to find them in newspapers.com, believe it or not. And
Neat. Wow.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so looking for a date that might clue you in to a direction. Why were they in that location and then they disappeared? That can
Mhm.
really help. And if they came over in the 1890s, at that point, you should be able to start finding shipping records. And sometimes there's notes in the sides of shipping records that people don't realize. So like, oh, what? Just a name of passengers list. Well, yeah, maybe. But there could be the captain or whoever's taking those notes might have put something in the sidebar. And
Mhm.
that's how we've other relatives have found babies that were born on board the ship, but there's no record, or that they died on the ship. And there's no record in the home country, and there's no record in the US. Quite often, I would suggest people go look at the shipping record and see if there's a birth or a death on board ship. And so that could kind of give you some clues too, if those records, exist. And those are a little bit harder to find, but
Yeah.
because there's catch as catch can. But about 1890s, there should be a lot more available. And they're very sketchy, when you start to go back previous to 1850s and things, they start to get harder to
Mhm.
find, but that could help you.
Right.
But I would
Okay.
strongly suggest, and I'll pop the link over to genealogystudies.com. And then there is a link you can do on the drop down bar that gives you the graduates. And then we can find some people, because it's hard to find people that are in exactly the country or expertise that you need sometimes. And people don't realize the field of genealogy, you can be a general genealogist, and that's fabulous because man, we need those. But you can also be have a specialty in a certain arena. And I think finding a specialist in Eastern European would be really helpful. And then we just kind of drill down, hey, do you know anything about the Lemkos? And so I'm going to help you find out if any of those people might be able to help you read some of those records, or if there's some existing. Another thing that I think is really smart to do is to post a name study. And there are some great name studies that are going on. And if you can post into most of these ancestry or family search and things like that, and you can post on there that you're doing particular what names you're studying, and
Oh,
make that public. And that helps other people who are looking up the same thing. And I'm going to give a tip on it. Family Search is a great website to start on. And the goal is to have like a big, family tree. But there's a lot of errors in there. And I'm sure you've probably run into some.
yes,
And
I have. Mhm.
yeah. And I've got people who keep trying to connect the wrong Thomas Nelson Jr. to my family. It's like, no, sorry, he did not sign the Declaration of Independence. He was a private from, Pennsylvania is not the same guy who was a colonel from Virginia. They're two different places, and you have to look at those. But
Right.
so they keep hooking them up to the wrong trees and that kind of thing. But you can have your own, tree on there. But it's really wise if you do put in a search and look for that person and see if they already exist before creating one. Otherwise, we've got duplicate, right? But I would strongly suggest not connecting to just the name. And that's for people listening, because I'm sure I'm preaching the choir here, that if you just connect to a name, it doesn't mean it's the same person, because there's more than one, believe it or not, Angela Breidenbach out there. And doesn't seem like it should be, but there's a lot. And then you have the slight name spelling differences. Today that matters. Back then it didn't matter, because we really didn't start spelling things properly. They just spelled things phonetically. And if the
Yeah.
person had an accent, that phonetic spelling could be really different with the accent. So, you can end up with a lot of different name spellings. So don't let a name spelling put you off. If you think you've got the right date in the right place, see if you can place other people around that person that make it become logical that that could be that person. But I will share with you. I'll send over a direct link to you for the people that are have graduated from the National Institute of Genealogical Studies with specialty in Eastern European. And let's see if maybe there's a way to, at your convenience, go through and find out if any of those folks can help you read some stuff. There's also professional genealogists, and a professional genealogist, you're going to have a range in the cost. And it can be anywhere from simple genealogy, $35 an hour, on up to $150 an hour. But a kind of a standard is around $50 an hour. And if you are just zeroed in on what it is you want to know, you can hire them for an hour and say, what can you tell me about this person and this name in this place? And they can also send you over a contract with a range of, this is what I'm going to look for. And they can share with you then all of the records and things like that that they find. And it just, you can work with them as little or as much as possible. So there's a lot of great places to find professional genealogists too, and that specialize in that area. It might be worth it to you to spend a couple $100 to get past that brick wall, because when you don't speak the language and you can't physically go there, it's not just a brick wall. It's a chasm that's impossible to leap. So I strongly suggest maybe even just saving it up. And I'm just talking to everybody here. So I don't know what Liz's personal finances are, and I don't want to know, but just, for Christmas and things like this, just some ideas, folks. Ask for donations to a genealogy account, and then have that genealogy savings account set up, and they can donate to that for you. They can give it to you in a card, whatever, and you put it into that account. But it's a way that it doesn't feel like you are killing the personal finances. Ask for it for Christmas. Ask for it for anniversaries and birthdays. Just, hey, what I really, really want is donations into my genealogy research fund. And, you'd be surprised. People really want to help you get the present that you want. And if all they have to do is donate to something that is your deep desire, I think that it makes things simple and fun. And then be sure to share with them what you discover, because I think that's something that people forget to do. And it's that sharing that's really important. How do you share genealogy with your family?
I do a lot of it just by talking to them. And that's also been a great way, just something that I kind of wanted to slip in here. I mentioned that I was talking to my mom, and how I had found this out about her family and about that one remaining tombstone in the cemetery of the church, and found out that we are related to the Dubnanskys. She said, oh yeah, I grew up on this street in this town in New Jersey, and it was Dubnanskys up and down the street, and I know we were related to some of them. And even last Sunday, we were just talking about some of this that I had found out, and just about her family history. I don't know much about it. She's not as into it as my dad. So my dad, I know a lot more about than my mom's side of the family, but I'm slowly getting it out of her. And I mentioned that I thought I found the church that they went to when they came here, because they didn't have any Lemko, churches here.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of them went to the Russian Orthodox Church, but and she believed that her mother, went to the Russian Orthodox Church and to a Russian Orthodox school. But then when I mentioned the name of this one church that was called Greek Catholic, which is sort of what the Lemkos called themselves, were Greek Catholics, she's like, wait, I think that's the name of the church. I remember that name of that church.
Wow.
She said, see if you can find where it is. So we pulled up Google Maps and we found where the church was. And my dad, who grew up in that same area, they were all huddled over my phone and zooming in and trying to figure out And my mom's going, where is that church? I said, it's right by the Walmart. And she just laughed where is that church? I said, it's right by the Walmart. And she just laughed because, of course, when she grew up, there was no Walmart there. But we finally zeroed it in and found the cross streets that it was nearby. And she's like, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's it, because we went to the, I know my mother went to that church on such and such a street in that town. So,
Oh my
yeah,
gosh. See, and
that was
that's
kind of fun.
beautiful.
So just keep talking to your family, to your
Mhm.
parents, even the ones that are a little bit more reluctant. Just try to keep digging and talking to them, talk about what that you found, that it might spark something in them. And it was fun to see my mom get really excited about this and relive some of it and talk about, I never knew my grandmother went to Russian school. I never
Wow.
knew that. So I learned something new on Sunday just by talking to my mom. And I think that's what's so precious about all of this, is that I'm learning about this and getting these stories before they're gone. So I would suggest just keep talking to your relatives and asking them questions, because they may think it's irrelevant, but it might end up being very important in the end. So,
Well, yeah,
yeah,
because now you can contact that church and ask for any records they might have.
right.
And I think
Mhm,
that's phenomenal. And those records right there, they're going to give you what they call the FAN, the family, the association, and the neighbors. And if you can put those people into context with your family, you actually will be able to get more information for leaping over the big pond, right?
mhm,
Because
right.
they may have records. And then if here's the other tip, if people don't know this one, take those people's names that you can see, are they on any of the church records, like the baptisms or the confirmations, the marriages, the did they serve in any service for the church, any volunteer service or
Mhm,
positions? Because those are all um, written down usually, especially in Russian Orthodox or a Greek Catholic or a Catholic church, things like that. They're all usually noted in the church records. And then from there, you can cross correlate to your family's names. So if there was a witness on something, if they were in a church
mhm.
board meeting, if they were called in to be disciplined, which that happened in my family. And so, mhm. So, you can, because, and oddly, they would discipline for things that we wouldn't even consider sinful now.
Mhm,
So it's really interesting to not just leave it at, did they get baptized? Were they buried? Were they married? You know, but were they called in for discipline? Did they serve on a board? And then look at the names of the people that are also on that board and start looking for land records, look for rental records, look for work records, and see if those names still correlate. That can really help you to build out the picture. And then, as you were talking, I thought about, we've mentioned the family history library, but because you mentioned Russian, I will bet you that they probably have, and I don't know this for a fact, I'd have to go double check it, but I bet you they do, because I know they have it for German. They have a standard like letter written for asking for information in the language of that place. And so, if those records were taken somewhere else, or if they're
mhm.
still in another language, you might be able to even communicate with a genealogist who doesn't speak English by using one of those format template letters that the Family History Library provides. So that's another way to do it. I think it's really cool.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah. Cool.
I know we're coming to the end, but I think there was something that I wanted to know about. And you have some books that really do have a lot of information that could help genealogists, even though they're fiction. Can you tell me a little bit about those books? And hold up the cover if you've got one near you.
Sure. Well, I think the one that I have right now that most directly relates to my genealogy, I am writing one that is based on a fictional person's genealogy,
Mhm.
which that I'll have to come back another time and tell you all about that one when that one's done.
You're on.
How's
You're
that?
totally on.
Um, but this one is Snow and the Tulips. It was actually the first novel that I wrote myself. So I wasn't in a novella collection or anything like that. And this one is based on a family story my dad took my grandmother back to the Netherlands, and that was a great way for him to learn about our family history, because she
Wow.
told him all the stories and everything about that. And one place they went was to this little town, to a memorial along the canal there in a little town called Genealogy in Friesland in the Netherlands.
You better
There
say
was
that name again. In a town called what?
I'm sure that anybody who's Dutch or Frisian listening to me is going, oh, her pronunciation, oh my goodness. Dronreep, and Dron. Well, I can't remember the spelling. It has
Gondreep.
lots of R's and there's J's in there and everything. But anyway, it's a little town, and along the canal there was a World War II memorial to 11 resistance workers who were executed there on April 11th, 1945. And my grandmother's sister, her son, so my dad's cousin, along with a few of the other townsmen, went, and after the Germans left and left the bodies laying there, went and found that one of the young men was still alive.
Oh.
And they took him to the house right along the canal there, the one closest, and they kind of patched this man up. He was quite seriously wounded, but they said, the Germans are going to come back and they're going to count the bodies and see that one's missing. And where do you think the first place they're going to look is? Well, of course, here. So my dad's cousin said, my mom will take care of him. And so they took this man to my Aunt Hilchi, Moike Hilchi's house, and she then took care of him, and the war ended 5 days later. But she took him in at great risk to her own life and took care of him. And every year on her birthday, he would come back and he would bring her flowers. And after she passed away, until he passed away, every year he would go to her grave and lay flowers at her grave on her birthday, because he was so grateful for what she had done. And so I took that story. I was fascinated. I was just in junior high when my dad and grandma took that trip. And my dad came back and told the story, and I was fascinated by it and knew that at some point I had to tell that story, but I didn't know how. And it wasn't until I became a fiction author that I thought, I can take that story and I can fictionalize it, and I can tell that story through my fiction. And so that's what Snow and the Tulips is all about. That was the inspiration behind it. And it was a lot of fun to research my family more and the story more, to find out what parts that we had been told were true and what parts that we had been told that were not true, that were legend. So that was a lot of fun to do. But this book directly came out of my family history.
See, and I think that's the crucial thing that people don't realize. You can write an article, you can write a nonfiction book, you can write a biography, you can even write your own autobiography, but you can also write fiction, which allows you a little leeway, because people get in their head, oh, I have to tell it exactly this and exactly that. Well, people don't want to know what time of day they brush their teeth, unless it has to do with they're getting attacked by whatever.
Right.
During that time, or something that has something crucial to the plot. But learning how to take a true story and fictionalize it makes it more fun sometimes for people to read, because it's not so dry. And I think that's one of the main reasons I wanted to invite you on Genealogy Publishing Coach, because I wanted to show people you can do things in a much more creative way than name, date, place, birth, marriage, death. You can really, those are important. Those prove those people were who they were. And to get 3 proofs, birth, marriage, and death, that's amazing and sometimes impossible. But it's a crucial thing to be able to tell the story in a way that people want to hear it or see it or read it. And I say it that way because here they can see and hear us, but you could also watch it as a movie. You could read it as a book. You can listen as an audiobook or a podcast. I just think that those are so important. I have a book series that is not just regular print, but it's also coming out in large print. And this one also has Montana genealogy in it. So if you have a family, the Queen of the Rockies, it has a large print series. So 1 through 6 are large print, as well as regular print, as well as ebook, that kind of a thing. And I'm actually playing with the idea of bringing out an audio this coming year. We'll see. But this one is got a Christmas part in it, and it's very related to Christmas. And so the first book in the series, and this is December when we're recording this, so I thought I'd share that a little bit. And so if you're interested in Queen of the Rockies, it's when it's the Gilded Age in the US, which is kind of at the end of the Victorian Age for the UK and Britain. And it's the Gilded Age here in America. And we talk about the gold rush era as it's ending, and mining and that kind of a thing. But this is this particular one, Queen of the Rockies, has a lot about the children who were abandoned at the end of the line for the orphan train. And they're
Mm.
kind of a hidden historical element, because if you go look up the orphan train, oh, all the children were either adopted or farmed out or whatever.
Mm.
In all reality, in Montana's records, in the Montana room here, in Missoula and in Helena, there are records of orphans that were abandoned, whether they didn't find a placement or whether they were placed and then later got back on the train and ran away. There were quite a few children that ended up on the streets of Helena, Montana, and
Mm.
as Montana was becoming a state. And so this one starts out in 1889, and then it goes on through the series to 1910. But I did the same thing as you. I felt like I really wanted to tell a story that would capture the imagination of people. So I put in some characters in here that are fictional, but all the characters around them and the history around them is true. And this way, it allowed me to add a little bit of romance into the story while we're seeing the truth of the abandoned children from the orphan train that are a very, very tiny footnote in history. And so to me, it was a way of both speaking the truth, but doing it in a creative and entertaining way. So I love that you are preserving history the way that you are, and that you're preserving your family history the way you are. And I hope you'll come back and be with me again in the future.
Thank you. I would love that. Thank you so much for having me. It's always so much fun to chat with you.
I'm delighted, and I hope you will. Yeah, thank you. So see you all. Thanks for being with us on Genealogy Publishing Coach. Please be sure to check out Liz Tolsma at liztolsma.com. And on social media, are you, tell me, do you have different names, or is it all at Liz Tolsma?
Just at Liz Tolsma. There is one other, but she got married, and so she's not Liz Tolsma anymore even. So if you look up Liz Tolsma, you're probably going to find me. I am unique.
Yay!
Yes.
And, so liztolsma.com. I'm Angela Breidenbach at angelabreidenbach.com. And on social media, you can find me at Ange Breidenbach. And thank goodness Google has helped people spell my name, because it's Breidenbach. And we'll see you again on the next episode of Genealogy Publishing Coach.